One of the most interesting and dramatic chapters of Zweig's memoir is the chapter that he wrote about sexuality. It's an odd thing. Zweig wrote an entire draft of The World of Yesterday, his autobiography, in Ossining, New York, about a mile uphill from Sing Sing prison in the summer of 1941. He wrote it at a furious pace. He was terribly depressed. He didn't go out, he didn't do anything. He sat there, he wrote sometimes as much as 70 pages in a single week. His wife, then Lotte, was typing, not able to keep up with his production of new pages. She was typing and they worked day and night, and people who visited thought that they were driving themselves into the grave on the sheer intensity of their work. It was a sweltering summer as well. But then, after having written the whole book, he left New York State, New York City. He left America and went back to Brazil to give lectures and to think about whether this might not be a place that he could restart his life. And then he wrote an entirely new chapter. It's the only completely new section of the book that was written, and this is the chapter in which he delved into his experience of sexuality in Vienna as a young man. And the stories that he tells of that period are some of the best historical documentation of the unbelievable schizophrenia of eroticism at that point in the city, where on the one hand, from the fashion to the nature of interior furnishings, everything could not have been more clamped down, buttoned up, repressed. And then at the same time, he describes there being brothels and prostitutes absolutely everywhere, the different kinds of prostitutes operating at different levels in the city of Vienna, about the ways that restaurants had special secreted off chambers where people could engage in all sorts of orgiastic frolicking, of these hidden sexual dynamism that the city contained in conjunction with a very, very stiff repressed facade. That torturous clash between desire and possibility came to Zweig to seem the center of the book. And in fact, there are some remarkable letters that he wrote in the last weeks and months of his life in which he describes to friends the entire book as a study of the sexuality of his youth. So why that was so important is part of what I try to talk about in my book. Zweig, I think, goes so far as to suggest that the ways in which desire was throttled by hypocritical morality in Vienna and in Europe in a larger sense was part of the reason that there was such temptation to ecstatic politics, such as National Socialism offered under Hitler. We don't always recognize, when we look back on the moment in which Vienna was such a fertile city for the arts and for the sciences, the degree to which the city, even then, was steeped in malice and hatred of many varieties, with anti-Semitism already a very strong and very troublesome strand in the way that the culture worked. He understood that unless you had enormous success primarily through the arts or through certain categories of the sciences, as a Jew, your opportunities were hugely limited, and you were going to be faced regardless with a sense of being distasteful in some deep way. I think that this drove him early on into a life where he sought not just the excitement of travel, but also the potential of other cultures opening up other ways of human beings interacting. He writes very, very movingly, for example, of what the discovery of Paris was for him. I think that he'd never really known what racial tolerance was until he went there, and he found it absolutely a euphoric experience. He loved seeing people of different color slipping into apartments together as lovers. There was something about that that I think was intoxicating in a way that it's difficult for us even to imagine then what it was coming from Vienna, to realize, my God, you can be dark-skinned and you can be light-skinned and you can find each other, and there can be an electric passion which no one in Paris at that moment, at least in Zweig's eyes, was looking at. And what he found in travel was possibilities for human expression of the values that meant most to him and that he didn't find in Vienna. And in fact, one of the reasons that his actual exile became unbearable to him was not really the loss of Austria, as critical as that was in many ways, but the loss of mobility in a larger sense. His heart began to be broken on that level very much after the First World War. He writes again and again of what it was like pre-World War I to be able to travel without a passport. If you didn't have, as part of a very aggressive education system, an effort to help people accept that no matter where you came from or what color you were, you might have something to offer the world, the economics were never going to balance out right. And I have to say, when we look at our own world and we look at the areas where there are conflicts, economic injustice is part of it, but there's also some stereotyping, prejudicing with one people against another, a nationalist demonizing. And he sought to project his vision of pan-European values onto the continent at a moment when I think he saw very clearly that nationalism could bring down the whole of Europe very, very soon if extremely what we would call proactive steps were not taken to address this.